welcome back to live from the Edinburgh International Culture Summit. My name is Jonathan Mills, and it is my great pleasure to be your host on this podcast, where we're going to be talking about culture and education. The summit started yesterday with a discussion on culture and freedom. We had a special session involving a big delegation from Ukraine. How they got here is only anyone's best guess. It was extraordinary that they were with us, an extraordinary level of commitment that that country is showing at the moment to their own cultural identity. It was very moving to be with them yesterday as they shared some of the stories from the front line and their extremely passionate efforts to assert the importance, the beauty, the uniqueness of Ukrainian culture. Earlier this morning, we had a fascinating plenary session in which Deirdre Quastrom, the Vice President of Education at Microsoft Corporation, was in a dialogue with Andreas Schleicher from the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation Development. And both of them put very different perspectives on a similar challenge. What is the future of education? What is the future of the schoolroom? Is it live? Is it digital? Is it both? What is the emphasis that we should place on creativity in education? And to help expand that discussion, I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by Aya Tuna, the head of the national program for the Latvian School Bag, Ashley Solomon, musician, and Robbie Gordon, theatre educator. Welcome. I've got some questions to ask you, but before doing that, why don't we go to each of you, starting with you, Aya, and ask you about your own work as an educator.
Thank you very much for inviting to this panel, first of all, and for opportunity to be in this summit. It's really inspirational and helps a lot. My background is history teacher, so to say. I'm trained to be historian, history teacher, but all my professional life, I've always been interested in something behind the borders of my profession. So early on, I was engaged in different projects during period of time in our country. We started implement change in education towards more democratic, child-centered education. And then I worked with civic education and community development. And all the time, culture has been next to me. And some 7 years ago, I was invited to Ministry of Culture to develop new program where education and culture directly goes together. This is Latvian School Bag, providing access for all kids to professional arts and culture. So that's in short.
Very good. And we'll certainly come back to talking about the Latvian School Bag and some of that access that is so extraordinary, what you've been implementing in many parts of Latvia. Ashley, I'm going to bring you in now, and it's fantastic what you've achieved as a musician, as a pioneer of early performance practice, and indeed in establishing an ensemble as respected and as celebrated as Florilegium. But many people may not know about the work that you undertake on a very regular basis in other countries, particularly I'm thinking here of Bolivia. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. And it's a real honor to be part of this incredible summit addressing really visceral and important issues for the future of music education and culture. Yes, I suppose I'm known for my work with Florilegium, and also as an educator, I've been teaching at tertiary level for over 25 years at the Royal College of Music. But as you say, I received an invitation back in 2002 to go out to Bolivia to experience a musical cultural heritage that I knew nothing of as a musician. And that sparked an interest in me that has pursued my work out there for over 20 years and had some important impacts on the development of culture and the respect for cultural heritage that I was completely unaware of, and a lot of the world is getting to know a little bit more of since I've been working out there.
Tell us more though, Ashley. What are the musicians? What do they play?
So they all sing, and church services are very important in Bolivia. We have to remember that the Jesuits went out there around the 1580s to convert the local communities to Christianity and didn't speak any of the 7 indigenous languages. So they used music as a way of evangelizing the scriptures. And so they were taught to sing using sacred texts in Latin and Spanish, although, as I say, that was not one of the 7 languages that most of the Indian communities spoke. Through teaching them to sing music, they then had brought instruments with them and taught them to play instruments. So there are instrumentalists out there from the 17th and 18th century. Whole choirs of orchestras in cathedral churches there, some as many as 50 or 60 instrumentalists that are reported. Some churches had 4 organs, so they explored polychoral works. And the quality of the music that was either composed before heading out with the Jesuits or by encouraging the local indigenous population to compose music is of the highest caliber. And that has fed into a flourishing artistic vision for communities for centuries now. And so Bolivia and the people I work with out there are outstanding singers, great instrumentalists. But more importantly, they have a passion to learn and a desire to be seen and respected equally as something that we take for granted in Europe. And that's what's so stimulating for me.
Thank you. Robbie.
Hello.
Tell us the Robbie Gordon story. Well, don't actually, because it would take far too long.
Exactly.
But tell us a little snippet of it.
I'm not known for my brevity as well. So yeah, I'm a theatre maker from Preston Pans, which is, for anyone that doesn't know, about 15 minutes down the road from the Parliament by car. And really, when I grew up there, I didn't really have great access to the arts and arts provision. And really, for me, my lifelong mission has been to change that and to change that circumstance for people living in rural communities and often working class communities as well. And really, my approach to education is trying to effectively afford people rich cultural experiences, and particularly those who think that culture is not for them. So that really takes on a lifelong learning approach. So my approach to education, yes, I work with young people, but work with a range of different communities, from geographical to communities of interest. In recent months, I've worked with care experience young people, people living in the community with dementia, a homeless football team, and also an entire town as well.
Tell me about the entire town.
Well, it was just fascinating, actually. So there's a place called Wallistown just outside of Ayr, and through Create Scotland's Culture Collective Fund, we were funded with the Ayr Gaiety Theatre to go out and do a bit of work in Wallistown. And there was just something bubbling in that community. It's a community that suffers from deprivation. There's quite a lot of particularly representatives saying from the community saying, "Oh, nothing ever happens here. We can't get things going." And there was a lot of really active people in the community, and also third sector organisations who want to change that. So alongside the Violence Reduction Unit, the council, the fire service, other charities, employability and skills from the council, local councillors, we knocked every single door in the community. And basically what we effectively did was worked with partners to do an asset-based community development approach, and different agencies sort of deliver on different work. For us as a cultural organisation, as part of that partnership, one of the things that we heard was there was no positive space for young people. So we created a group for young people. There was an addict who was part of that process who said, I have an idea for a film and I want to write a film. So what we did is we put a writers group on for recovering addicts. And in addition to that, we also worked with primary school to create theatre shows. We did a muralism project, and we also introduced the community to parkour. So really it's been a sort of cross-agency approach to really creating social change in a community.
Fantastic. So we've got some questions, and I'm just going to throw them at random to anyone who would like to answer them. And all of you can, please. How can education policy better reflect the impact of culture on the global economy? Robbie.
Could you ask that question again, actually?
How can education policy better reflect the impact of culture in the global economy? I guess what this is really meaning is, how can we include culture much more mainstream part of the education in order to prepare people? So Aya, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about feedback from different cultural organizations in Latvia during COVID pandemic times, when they said Latvian school bag was the only opportunity for us to work during this period. So what I'm trying to say, making culture part of school curricula or school experience for all children opens huge employability opportunities for all sorts of artists and creative professionals. And we can see, and there is economic impact, definitely. On another hand, young people who suddenly discover that culture and art is not only about being alone on stage and singing or painting or doing something sort of on the first row, but there are lots of different professions and skills and interesting things. If I'm in computers, I can also be part of a cultural business and so on. So they start to think about the future in terms of knowledge economy with bigger added value. So if they understand that culture is something very, very diverse and interesting, they can go in that direction. And we have new 7th grade and 5th grade and 11th grade each year, and there is always where to go and for whom to perform.
Robbie?
Well, just reflecting on some of the stuff from the panels today, you know, culture is a tool for learning. And there was just some really fascinating stuff that was brought up in the previous panel, where people were actually talking about this compartmentalization of culture. So talking about, you do music when you do music, you do drama when you do drama, you do art when you do art. It's actually inhibiting, you know. Culture is life, and actually they are fundamentally tools for learning. And I think some of the richest experiences I've had in an education sense is when you're empowering people to learn real world skills and different skills through culture. I was involved in a really fascinating process called Pages of the Sea. It was a 1418 Now project. And really, it was all about creating 30 by 30 meters portraits of World War I soldiers in the sand that would be washed away by the tides. Yes, it's an artistic project. Do I know how to draw a 30 by 30 meter project? No, I don't. But there's actually a mathematical process behind it. There's gridding up. There's where's the sun going to be? There's what time's the tide going to be? What time's the tide's going to come out? And I was able to embark on that process with a group of art students who fundamentally felt that they were good at art, but they never did well at school. They didn't do well in traditional subjects like geography, maths, English. But actually, through this, you know, artistic challenge, this massive problem solving challenge that we had to go on, we all utilize those skills in a real world context. So I guess that's where the value is for me. It's actually stopping thinking about culture as, you know, compartmentalized things and actually really embedding it across the way we live, because that is how the job market works, and that's how the job market of the future is going to continue to work.
Ashley, I'm going to bring you in here as well to this dialogue. Obviously, you weren't with us today, but what is your perspective, especially your perspective from the work that you've done in Bolivia?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. It's really interesting hearing both Robbie and Aya's comments on this. For me, culture is a much more holistic experience, and I think we're moving away, even at tertiary level, from the sort of elitist soloist and everyone who wanted to be that soloist, but thinking as an education, it's a holistic approach to something that has so many strands in everyday life. One example, maybe in my work in Bolivia, is a choir of Guarani Indians in Palmarito, which is a very tiny, very poor neighborhood. And 60% of the children there can read music. Now, that doesn't mean they're literate and read or write, but they sing every day together and have been taught to read music. And that gives them a bond and a strength and a unity and a confidence that they otherwise wouldn't get from a normal activity of education. So I think it's incredibly far-reaching, and in the areas where I work, which are very underprivileged, they feel really rich as human beings through their expression of music as their form of sort of cultural engagement. And I think that's something that has inspired many, and it's something that shouldn't be undervalued. I mean, it's as wonderful that I see the other side of the coin at the Royal College of Music in London, where we have aspiring top soloists. But in fact, I almost get more from working with this choir of Indian singers in Palmarito than as I do with colleagues and students who are at the very top of their profession, because culture is not just about being the best and being number one in a competition. It's about this, as I said, sort of holistic approach to being a human and education.
But perhaps we should rephrase the question. It was a good question, but perhaps we should rephrase it. It's not so much how education policy can better reflect a kind of the value that we put on development of culture within education as a development of skills, but actually thinking about the economy in a different way, actually.
I would like to add, thinking about education in a different way. When Robbie, you were giving your comment, I was thinking probably so many people have not succeeded in traditional subjects because they were taught in traditional way. And using culture and arts, events and artifacts and approaches, we can explore and learn about the world in a more holistic and more understandable and pleasant way. And I think this is the big difference. If we talk about change in education these days and in 21st century, so culture has its very, very important place. For example, we are underlining always to teachers that they have to think about a cultural event or art piece, what students see and experience, as a text. It can be the same content as in a textbook or in some other written text, which, let's be honest, youngsters are not very eager to read. But once they see theater performance on a particular subject, they look up the book and then it goes, and that's real experience. So we have to change our minds that learning happens just during the lessons and just reading the books and doing homework in a regular way. So that's the key, how education can open the door to culture and benefit both from it.
And indeed, Deirdre Quastrom Morning was saying, Deirdre, by the way, for those listening in, is, as I said, the Vice President for Education at Microsoft Corporation, but she was also a pioneer, is also a pioneer, I should say, of the use of the online video game program Minecraft, which is literally we mine knowledge, we use craft to shape it. And she is a pioneer of using that platform and program to encourage students to think about education as a tool for education. Robbie.
Absolutely, and I think that it's thinking about these alternative ways. I think you just mentioned, yeah, theatre's a great vehicle for people understanding books, right? But you know, as is film, as is video games, and I think we're in this. I think when I was at school, drawing on that experience, teaching was quite didactic. You know, we've spoken a lot today. I've had a few side conversations about even how classrooms are set up. Is young people face the teacher and they receive the knowledge from the front. You know, in theatre we work a lot in circles. In theatre we get the material up in its feet in order for people to understand it. We improvise, we play, and I think for me it's sort of particularly looking at high school education from a Scottish perspective. We're obsessed with this subject must be 45 minutes and it must fit into this really tight brief. You know, the time for play and exploration is very short before they have to move on to the next subject, put their next hat on, and go into it. But actually, it's not reflective of the job market. Sona from the Gambia Academy today said she's designing an education system that's extremely holistic and actually looks at the kind of real world issues that are going on in their community. And often she receives the feedback like, it sounds like a nightmare, the planning involved in that. And she said, I love nightmares. And I just thought that was fantastic. And really attending this summit, like, you know, I just want to meet loads of people that love nightmares, and really engage people in this kind of concept of going, we have this really structured way of thinking about education, but we need to just introduce a bit of chaos into these rigid systems. We need to be more complex. We need to be more bespoke. And, you know, really as educators, a couple of people have said this today, but we wear a lot of different hats, you know. It's sometimes we're mentors, sometimes we're allies, sometimes we are providing feedback, sometimes we're all sorts of different things. And actually, I think that's the future of education, getting people in the room with young people who are highly skilled and flexible, and up for challenge and nightmares.
Ashley, your experiences in Santa Cruz, you're obviously very much part of the community there. Robbie's just described a kind of remarkable array of skills he brings to all of the jobs that he does. Are they similar, or they're probably similar in range, but probably not the same detail? Can you explain some of those to us?
Yes, of course. There is a very interesting synergy between what Robbie has described, actually, with music and the work I do there. I mean, Santa Cruz is one of the major cities, so we are based there when I work, and anyone who wants to take part in the projects that I do have to travel, and that's from all over the country. And that's facilitated by an organization, which means that nobody is penalized for not living in Santa Cruz. The important thing, I think, is that they feel that they can be versatile enough to take on new skill sets, and to be challenged in ways that they possibly feel uncomfortable. And I think that's what's quite important in art and culture, is that you challenge, and then the expectation often is heightened. I think innovation is really important. And I suppose the things that I've been working with the musicians in Santa Cruz about, it is not necessarily innovative for European musicians, but discussing basic rules and principles of music, which they take for granted, because they all, as I said, sing naturally. And one issue about educating in a more structured way in the work that I do in Santa Cruz is you worry that you might detract from the natural talent that they have, and this experience that just comes out of them as human beings. And so it's a very fine line I work when I'm there, because I don't want to crush any of their natural skill sets, but we need some structure in the way we sort of are educating them so that there is longevity in what we're doing, and ultimately they can be self-sufficient. I mean, one wonderful example is in one of my first projects, I was auditioning singers, and a young chap came to me who had a tenor voice, and he was a singer in a mariachi band. And he could read music, but he was not interested in any kind of structured musical education. And I tried to explain to him that, in order to sing music from the Baroque period, we need a little bit of structure, we need an understanding of style, without taking away what is naturally a very beautiful voice. And he got that and understood that, and we were able to channel that. We managed to get him a scholarship to study on the continent at conservatoire level, and he spent 2 years very depressed because he was having to break down all those natural abilities and put it into structure, which I think had quite an impact on him. So I suppose that taught me something, that for the communities that I work with, it's not necessary for them to have the sort of stringent education we experience and we all know in Europe. But in fact, to find a way to nurture, to draw out, to innovate, to inspire, to find excellence and advocacy in what they have naturally, and to hone that. And that's one of the challenges I face. And it means that I find myself wearing two very different hats when I'm there in South America and when I'm back in the UK.
Yes, I mean, I think that's fascinating. I think it would be essential for us to invite some of these musicians who are your collaborators to a future summit. Ashley, let's just put that on the table, because we don't have the music with us. I'm desperately wanting to play this because it is simply stupendous. The quality, the choir, the exuberance of this music making is remarkable, and power to you and those wonderful children that you work with. I'm going to change. We've got lots of. Sorry, Ashley.
No, I was just going to thank you for that, and it's certainly something. Until you're in the room with them, you can't quite believe what you're experiencing.
It is some of the most beautiful singing I have ever heard, and so we've got lots of questions piling up. So I should get on with a couple of other questions from people who are writing them in. One really that any of you could answer, but I'm going to come to you first on it. But because in the overview you have of a national program and responsibility for the Latvian school bag, presumably one of the things you also do is work with professional arts organisations. And what do you think is, how can they contribute to arts education? They do a lot. Museums and orchestras and big opera companies and ballet companies, theatre companies, all sorts of established companies in our own tradition, in a Western European tradition. They make a contribution to arts education, but how can we get that to be more focused and better in schools?
Thank you for this question, because I was hoping I will have a chance to talk about this. So first of all, kids or teenagers or youngsters, they are very, very smart, and they feel what is real and what is quality offer and what is fake and didactic, or someone wants to tell something. And they accept and enjoy and use for their development the first type of cultural events, and are very cautious and develop negative experience if they face something made for children. So that's one thing. The real, authentic pieces of art or cultural events is what should be and what is in most cases provided for school audiences. But another thing is that bridging these two areas and taking into account very practical reasons like limited funding or schools' time schedule and so on, cultural organizations also more and more develop special events for students, not in terms of it would be different quality or different forms, but for example, in terms of length. It's 1 hour, it's come to the school, and it's easier for teachers to fit it in a working day. And at the same time, it's of high quality and messages here. What we, on behalf of students, want from creative professionals, to tell stories, to talk about things they need to talk about, and talk about things which are crucial for youngsters in particular age. And they are doing a good job in that sense, but it took some time, because if we think about promotion, how the different events are publicized, usually it has been for families with parents, because the money was with the parents, and they had to convince parents to go to the museum, to go to the theater, concert, and so on. Now, money is with the teacher and school, and in the focal point is young person, first grader or fifth grader. What is essential, topical, interesting for them? What will help them grow, enjoy, to explore cultural world? So this is very important. And indeed, you very correctly mentioned that our job from program view is to facilitate conversation between educators and creative professionals, to understand what one side is saying, what would be needed, and for another side, what you are offering. And it hasn't been that easy, but it develops, and we are very, very satisfied, and both involved parts are also satisfied. If I may give one example of theatric, cannot pronounce this word, theater performance developed in this mobile version. Actors go to school, and action takes place in 3 classrooms situated in the same school hall next to each other. And the actors are changing, going from class to class and changing places and telling story from perspective of those 3 characters. And story is about relationship of those teenagers, because it's for teenage students, which gives later on opportunity to discuss things like mobbing, like involving into conflict or responding in different way. So these site-based events are more targeted at what is topical for students, at the same time being expressed by artistic means. And we get 2 results. So there is something for teachers to do later on as after following activities. And there is this, how it was told. So there is no need always to shout or cry or go away, but you can express your emotions and solve situations in a different way. So such examples are new. Also, we talk about museum professionals. When students go to you, and also when you organize digital events, you should show what they can see only coming to this place. There is no need for lecture, because lecture can take place in school or somewhere else. But if we come to museum, we explore this place, what is situated, what is kept, how it's kept, what to do with it, how it operates. And so we can tell about each. So you mentioned probably that sort of music is a very typical example, and you said theater is a very typical example. But we have developed like reminder that at least 10, we divided into 10 different art spheres, and for teacher to keep it somewhere next to vision. And during year after year, as for this program in Latvia, what is essential, it is regular approach to cultural events. It's not project for one school year or for a couple of months, but if you start from first grade, you experience something, then you add on next year, you add on next year, and it's a wonderful tool to use at the end of the schooling life to be aware of different cultural expressions.
Ashley, changing hats for a moment, as the artistic director of Florilegium, you obviously have a busy performing schedule, but I know that you do quite a lot of education work and outreach work as well.
Yes. Sorry, I was muted there for a second. Yes, I mean, any kind of education is important for an ensemble. I think I always say to my students, I'm probably a good teacher because I play, probably a good player because I teach. And I think there's something that's quite important between the two, being able to express those two elements, because as a musician, you need to have a portfolio career in order to survive these days. And it's important that you embrace education and find a stimulation, not only for my own development, which I get from teaching, but through inspiring the next generation to take over and take the journey further and beyond where I have taken it. So our education projects are not only at tertiary level, because we're ensemble and association at the Royal College of Music, so we're working with students there on a regular basis. But as a group specializing in period performance practice, we work with modern instrumentalists on Baroque music, because it shouldn't feel that it's elitist as a genre, and that only with the right tools you can play this music in an understandable way. So that's part and parcel of it, but also teaching on courses, and we do that pre-pandemic. We were doing quite a few of those across Europe, and that was for anyone involved in an experience of wanting to express themselves in this repertoire from, say, 1600 to 1800, with or without the correct tools, but understanding the aesthetic of the music. And that's important, to take that beyond, so that it breaks the mold where people think that without the right tools you cannot justify the musical discourse. And I'm a very strong advocate that, in fact, that's not the point. I mean, I enjoy working, for example, with a string quartet playing Mozart. I love working with a brass quartet playing Mozart. I love working with a recorder quartet who is struggling through Mozart. I think music as a medium is important. It sort of doesn't matter what the tools are that you have. And so that's part of where my education work has been working. And certainly when I went out to South America and worked in the missions for the very first time, they certainly didn't have any historical instruments. They now build instruments based on models that we've taken out for them. And so they're actually producing their own instruments to investigate this repertoire. And so there are a number of sort of multifacets in that area that I find fascinating at the moment.
Robbie, you do a lot of work in this area. What do you do? What's the best relationship that you and Wonderfuls have of a sort of theatre in education or classroom experience, or a relationship with some kind of powerful education element at the core of it?
Yeah.
What's the best example?
Best example probably is we've got a partnership with the Traverse Theatre, of which I also work for as well. We have a program called Positive Stories for Negative Times, and really for me, you know, just to pick up on something that I was saying earlier on, like that fundamentally this, in terms of arts, working with arts organisations within education, the best examples of practice are when the young people are consulted, and actually when the young people's voices are present in the work, you know, and I think that's the thing, that instead of us as artists who are no longer young people, sadly, designing programs and then plopping them into schools and expecting them to work, that actually if we work with young people from the inception of the idea, we can have these really fruitful programs. So we'll all remember March 2020 when the pandemic first struck. Community centres, schools, youth theatres, theatre buildings all shut, and there was this massive problem, and you know, effectively the live theatre sector was going to shut down. people couldn't work. Everyone was talking about freelancers, everyone was talking about professional artists. But somewhere just within all that conversation, I turned to young people and students, and I thought, what about all this positive space that people really rely on for mental health, well-being, connection, safety, warmth, shelter, all gone in an instant, and really it felt like no one was talking about it. What we did is we actually went to a college group, we contacted all the students, we went to a youth theatre group, we met them all online. We spoke to, I think, around about 100 to 200 young people, and we said, what do you need right now? And that is where Positive Stories for Negative Times came. Really what people were saying is they needed positive space and they needed it now. So effectively what we did is we created an infrastructure where, and a handbook where sort of facilitators could learn how to sort of work online. That doesn't feel very innovative now, but within the first 4 weeks of the pandemic, people were really wondering about how do we do this safely from a child protection perspective? How do games work online? How do I do my traditional toolbox of exercises? So we trained about, I think it was 30 different organisations in Scotland, theatres and cultural institutions, universities, colleges, and around about, I think, 40 freelancers. And that was the first step. The other thing that young people said they needed was good quality material to do online. And actually, generally, there'd been a dearth of material in Scotland in terms of the commissioning process in a while. Big theatres and institutions were not commissioning plays for young people anymore. And if they were from a very London-centric perspective. People from rural communities, working class communities in Scotland and Wales and Ireland just weren't really feeling seen. So really the project that we designed was a training that allowed people to pivot online. And we commissioned 5 plays. We commissioned 5 of the best writers working in the UK, including Chris Thorpe, Sabrina Mahfouz, Steph Smith, B. Webster, and we gave those plays to young people to just have for this training pack. I think we got a bit of funding, and I think we were meant to do 50 organisations and commission 5 plays. We're at the stage now where we've commissioned 17 plays. There, I think, are between 500 and 600 groups who have taken part in the project. And we're now looking at a total of about 8,000 young people have experienced that work. There's another layer of it that's sort of been added within the second year project. We created a youth advisory board, and they come from every region in Scotland, and they sort of represent the diversity of Scotland as well, whether that be socioeconomic, racial, LGBT, and they now steer the project. They work with the writer at the inception of the idea, they dramaturg the work, they pick one of the plays, and they just played to almost a sellout house at the Traverse Theatre. And for me, that's my favourite example of that kind of work.
Thank you. We've probably got time for one more question. I'm going to come to that in a moment, but just to let you know, we've had some feedback from the many people who've been listening to this. And this is interesting feedback because it's somebody who's coming into us from Pakistan. And this is the quote, taking the school culture as a whole, inspired by the local as well as the international cultural practices bring through different learning environments. That is what we have been trying and developing and inculcating through projects of mutual interest between national and international partner schools. And yes, I agree with Aya. It's not something to be practiced for a term or so, but to be continued. And consistency makes a regular feature for not only the learners, but for the educators. This is the drama teacher and department head teacher from Queen's Park High School in Chester, who visited Pakistan and shared valuable practices with students and teachers. So just to give you a sense of the breadth of who's listening into this. So my final question to everyone, I think this will be something that we will want to ponder on for a while anyway, is that we've tended to focus the conversation so far on childhood education. And that's important, don't get me wrong. But I think one of the things that I was struck with today in some of the comments that were made was that this is not just, this was particularly from the New Zealand minister who was speaking to us in the chamber. This is surely not just about young people, but it's actually about lifelong learning. The question of the benefits of rich cultural experiences and cultural education experiences on lifelong learning. How can culture continue to inspire, educate and activate adults? So Aya, bringing you in on this one first.
I would like to thank you for that feedback which you read, and to the author of that feedback. I need it in written and to show to policymakers when they will vote for budget next year.
Of course.
Yes. You know, I think our language, how we speak, reveals deeper thinking, what we sometimes do not even realize. Either it's we should provide culture, or culture has to be something for those young people who are outside the school, or we have to do everything possible while they are in school to make them to want culture, to want them to go to theater because they have good memories from school times, to want them to buy ticket to the concert because they had wonderful experiences. They have tasted it and they want more. And this is why this regularity is so important. That's one thing. I was also very impressed by the comment in the plenary session about the youngsters, and was thinking about it a lot. So first thing, if you do not know, you cannot want it, even someone will give you. You will go buy this building. But second thing is, after graduating secondary school, young people tend to be very busy. You know, I shouldn't tell what kind of activities, but it's studying, it's making, starting careers, it's families, and it's everything. And I think it's quite practically that they sometimes save time on cultural events, unless they really have this need to go. Maybe not as often as it has been before, but still to be in contact with culture. But it has to come from them already.
I think one of the things that you said that I really want to pick up on is you're able to do it as long as you've been given the taste to begin with. And that's critical, because I think there are some places, I would include unfortunately parts of the UK in this, where it's not automatic anymore that people have that early childhood experience of culture. And if they don't, then maybe it's more difficult for them to actually have that desire in middle life or even later life. What do you think, Ashley? What about you, Robbie?
Yeah, I can dive in on that in terms of this early intervention of culture. Like, for me, I did not have a big, rich cultural experiences growing up. So I actually, I encountered really exciting culture when I was about 16 years old. Someone in a panel early on said the dead hand of school can kill anything. And that just like really stuck with me, and if you have an adverse cultural experience when you're at school, why would you want to go when you're an adult? Why would you want to pay for it? Why would you want to participate? Really a large part of the work I do is actually convincing people at later stages in life that culture is for them. And I think that's kind of really important. We just did a project that's coming back around. It just keeps coming back around, and those are the best projects. But we did a play about the Spanish Civil War, and 4 people from my hometown that went to fight in the Spanish Civil War. We thought initially we were going to write a play with some people, and it would just be an easy community process. We found the 4 names of the people that went to fight in the Spanish Civil War. We got the phone book out. We phoned every single person with the same second name until we tracked them down. But it turned out they all had 5 or 6 children, and those 5 or 6 children had 5 or 6 children, and then those 5 or 6 children had 5 or 6 children. The community was massive. You know, especially when you start factoring cousins and neighbours, and actually really the whole town got behind the story and the creation of the work. And these generally are not culture goers, regular culture goers. We'll be approaching doing the play for the 3rd time, but I think it might be about the 6th time some of the relatives have seen it. And anecdotally, I know that they've bought into culture since. Other cultural experiences, oh, I've seen this play about this, I'm going to go see it. And for me, that's, you know, that's the real value. It's like we need to work as a sector. We need to stop talking about this is our audience. We need to actually start talking about this is our community. And I think that's really important. And one of the amazing things from that process is, and I'm just going to get a quick quote up, but one of the family members from that process said, about a year before the first theatre performances, Wonderfuls had a preliminary reading of a script in Preston Pans Labour Club. Afterwards, I spoke to one of Uncle Willie's grandchildren. This was the brother-in-law of his dad, who said that they'd always believed that their grandfather had sacrificed his life for nothing. However, after attending the reading, they understood his reasons for going to Spain to fight, and now realised it had indeed been a very worthwhile cause. You know, I think that's the thing about education. That's historical. That's community-based. It's not even cultural, but it was done through a cultural process. And I think that's the value of it.
Ashley.
Yes, can you hear me now?
We can.
Great. Yeah, I was thinking about this concept of planting seeds early on for children, so that as they grow, as they develop, that spirit of inquiry, that spirit of searching out something that's more than just curricular activities, but extracurricular activities, becomes part of the DNA in their system, and that helps develop an interest beyond what we're trying to teach them. So it's a sort of, the word holistic that's been bandied around a lot, of course, today, is exactly what that is. And for lifelong learning, I think we need to ask ourselves also, what is the audience expectation of culture, and how is that changing? And what do we want to serve them in future? I think COVID and how we've experienced the digital and online systems of engaging with culture is something that we must continue to develop, and that, you know, that is one positive outcome of this, that the outreach, how we're able to sort of reach much wider and disseminate culture beyond the boundaries of the concert hall, the theatre, the classroom, I think is something that's vital that we continue to develop. But for lifelong learning, I think if there is that kernel of inquiry, if there is that experience, like Robbie said, that people really felt a connection with something, they will search it out, and I trust that they will. But we have to remain inventive, we have to remain creative, we have to find new ways of experiencing often the same thing. And I often ask myself, as a performing musician, you know, in 50 years' time, are we still going to be sat in large concert halls, having bought our program and experiencing a music exposition the way we've done for the last 200 years? I hope not. I think we need to move forward, and I think that's the way of engaging. And for the young generation, who will become sort of lifelong learners as they progress through their 30s, 40s, 50s, and then the next generation come through, it's ever evolving. I think if we keep replicating, that's going to stop us evolving and stop the desire to keep this engagement throughout our lives, hopefully, with culture. I think it's really important, but without that little kernel of inquiry, without that seed that's blossoming that we feed, it won't continue.
So just stay with us for a moment on that very word, because I like it. And I'm just going to ask you for a final reflection, Ashley, before we go to others. And I'm going to ask you all this same question. The personal one, really, because you're committed individuals with great expertise and much attainment and a lot of responsibility. But what was the kernel of culture that set you off on your respective careers that have led you to where you are today? Ashley.
Gosh. Well, it was an experience in life, actually, where I reached a crossroads and could have gone in either direction. And I made a choice, and it's something that I say to my students. There's sometimes a door that's slightly ajar, and you can choose to walk past it, or you can stick your foot in that door and just push it open a little and pop your head round and see what it is. And I had that experience when I was a teenager, and it's something I've not looked back on ever since. I'm so grateful that that's enriched my life through having a life as a performing artist and an educator. So it's, for me, it was one specific event that I don't need to describe, but just that moment when the door was slightly ajar.
Go on, describe it, Ashley.
Okay. I had a very serious accident and died and came back to life. And when I came back to life, I knew that I was not going to follow the path that my parents had wanted for me, but I wanted to follow something that I was desperately passionate about.
Well, that will do it. And that's an amazing answer, not one I expected. So apologies for my insistence, but thank you for your candor. And Aya.
And so complicated, and I do not know how to answer in short. I've always had this need to look for different ways how to understand myself and world, and culture is a wonderful mean to do it, probably. And I don't know how consciously it has been, or it has been just around in the air, how we say. During my teenage years, during my student years and so on, when I grew up, we lived in different system, and culture was some sort of resistance, some sort of giving sign who we are, to recognize. We have special jewelry pieces, and if you see someone wearing that, you know, you can talk with that person. We knew how to read between the lines. Poetry was enormously popular at that time. And also music and everything. There always has been this hidden message for freedom, for independence, for being together, for community. So that's probably one reason and one impacting factor. But another one is I'm quite joyful person, and culture gives so much joy. And culture allows you to cry when you want to cry. And I think that's what each person needs in life, to learn to laugh and to cry and to know when to do what.
Robbie?
For me, it would be youth theatre and engaging with that sector. It's a marvellous sector in Scotland, and really it helped foster my career, actually, even after I graduated as well. I still teach within youth theatre. They do this marvellous festival called the National Festival of Youth Theatre. They used to do this, National Theatre Scotland also used to do their version called Exchange. And I just had this wonderful pivotal time. I think I was on the cusp of 15 to 16, and I got to go away to a festival that was all about young people making theatre. And I come from a town where no one else wanted to do theatre. And all of a sudden I'm in this field with 300 other people camping who all want to do the same thing.
You weren't alone.
Yeah, I wasn't alone. There was loads of people. And this festival happens again and again and again. And I went back to home Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I was buzzing about it. And I went on to the National Theatre Scotland Festival the weekend after. So, within 10 days of my life, I'd never really met anyone that wanted to do the same thing as me. And I encountered probably around about 500 people from all across the world who all wanted to do that thing. And in that moment, I knew it would be possible.
This is a time when, sadly, our discussion is coming to an end. You have been listening to live from the Edinburgh International Culture Summit, discussing culture and education. I'm deeply grateful to Ashley Solomon, who's joined us from Israel, from Aya Tuna, who is from Latvia, but who's with us at the Scottish Parliament, and the one and only Robbie Gordon. So thank you, Aya, Ashley, and Robbie. And we'll be back tomorrow afternoon with another episode from the Scottish Cultural Parliament of the Edinburgh International Culture Summit, where we'll be talking about culture and sustainability. Until then, Jonathan Mills saying good afternoon to you.